Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to episode 9 of the Straight Outta Prison podcast. My name is James K. Jones, and this is my story.
And this is Haley Jones, and this is his story that has now become a part of my story.
So we're titling this episode
Wild Wild West.
Wild Wild West because where we left off in the last one, I was pretty much went to prison, just kept doing the same things, being selfish, running game, trying to get my way. And went through the drug program, graduated, got a sweet job, got a sweet setup in a sweet dorm, and pretty much messed that up because I saw a book that I wanted that was in my counselor's office. I wanted to
decorate your table in your prison cell.
Well, it was more than decorate. Like you cut out pictures and then you would dip it in wax and you put it on there, and then you put more wax on top, and so it would be like it had like this depth. And actually, that one. I mixed that hologram book with the heavy metal magazine that I had, which is like an adult comic book or something, but it had like crazy artwork in it. And when they took that from me, they actually kept that in the shift commander's office. That was like a shrine.
The table?
Yeah.
Why?
They said it was the best one they'd ever seen. So it was like,
but it also gave you the axe.
It did. But I was like, if it's the best one you ever seen, why don't you let me keep it? It's contraband. I got fired from my job and kicked out of the dorm, so I was headed to the Wild Wild West, and this would be my first experience with #real prison. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you also mentioned in the last episode that they put you in the worst possible job that there was in prison, which was in the kitchen as a punishment.
Yes, that was the worst place you could work at Brevard Correctional Institution was in the main kitchen. Their setup was weird because they had like a dining hall in the middle of the compound, but they didn't cook anything there. It was just like steam tables, and they would like make Kool-Aid or tea or whatever. All the meals were prepared in the main kitchen that was at the back gate. It was like hard work. If you think of 1,000 people, we've ran a catering business together. We've done, 700-800 people.
Right.
It's a lot of work. We did that 3 times a day. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you fed 1,000 people.
Wow.
Really 1,000 plus because we fed the officers there too. There were 200 or 300 officers there. So, we were looking at like 1,300 meals a day, 3 times a day. So it was a lot of work. And if you think about that, that produces a lot of dishes. And that was where they stuck me. I was going to be the dishwasher.
Wow. Had they not heard of paper plates?
No, that costs money. They ain't wasting their money when they got all that free labor. I mean,
okay, so your punishment was that they put you as a dishwasher.
They made me a dishwasher. I was like one of 4. And then they put me in a dorm, which was one of the Wild Wild West dorms, which was, the dorm in itself was disgusting. It was kind of weird, like, at that compound, like D dorm and E dorm were drug dorms, so they were like better taken care of. And I think some of that had to do like with the influence that had counselors, you had people that like came in and cared. But like it was like painted and clean, the floors were waxed. We didn't have bugs, we didn't have roaches, we didn't have rats.
So you had all those things in the new place you went to?
A dorm, yeah, it was. Those dorms were just nasty. They were like dark and dirty, and they smelled and. Because there was really, you had one dorm officer, so anything could go in those dorms. Like, it could be like peace, but it could also be total chaos. And then you always had to worry about getting robbed, and you didn't have to worry about that in D dorm. But the thing about getting robbed, anything you had, you put in a locker, and you put a lock on it. And if you had a roommate that was shady, he would invite his friends in to rob you and tell them, my roommate's got cigarettes, my roommate got coffee, my roommate got pies. That's like oatmeal pies and Swiss rolls.
How did they rob you? Did they like...
They would do it when you weren't there. Like they would sneak in your room, like when you weren't there, when the police was on the other side. Because it was like... Movements there were easy to track because the people did the same thing every day. Like an officer... He would start off, there were 4 pods each storm, so he would start off in pod 1 and do his little rounds. It would take him at least 20 minutes to get to pod 4. So if you saw him going to pod 1, you knew he was going to go 1, 2, 3 before he came to 4. You could go rob somebody's room.
Wow. Oh, because no one was in the rooms at that time.
No, but if your roommate was shady and he left your room open, like he would leave his room open for his homies or whatever. They had ways of breaking in locks and stuff like that. And I got robbed a couple times, and that's like the worst. That was the worst. It was so you just felt so violated. Like I don't know. I'd never been robbed before, so
So essentially, did you feel like you were starting over in this new dorm because it was new people, obviously, too, or new roommates, new job?
everything was new. Like
Okay.
everything I knew up until that point. Like I'd had a pretty cushy first year in prison in the drug program. Everything I knew up to that point was over with, and it was because of myself. It wasn't. I could have stayed there forever and EOS my sentence, but like I talked about in the last one, I was selfish. I was still a criminal. Still I didn't care. I wanted to get my way. I wanted to get what I want, and I'm gonna figure out how to get what I want, and that's all there is to it. And it led me to the same place that those things lead anybody to, destruction.
Yeah. So you got a new roommate or roommates, one or more.
Well, I moved around a little bit at first. My first roommate, I forget what happened to him. He went somewhere or got transferred or something. Then I had another one. But then in that first one, I got robbed. Like within like a couple months, somebody came in and just took all my stuff basically. And it's so funny, the stuff that pissed me off the most, that I was the most aggravated about my things getting stolen, was not like stuff that I could replace. Like I could go buy some more cigarettes or some more coffee or some more oatmeal pies or soups. But deodorant. Because we had these
The
things.
same would be true today if someone stole that from you.
I don't know. It's like you couldn't buy those things in prison, but there was like an incentive. Like everybody got a Christmas voucher to get a Christmas box. That meant, your people, your family could fill up a box, and it had to weigh a certain amount, and it had to everything had to match exactly what it said you could have. You get those, and so you got 3 or 4 of those throughout the year, and then you got a Christmas box. And I would always load my boxes up with like hygiene, shampoo, conditioner, lotion, like things that I couldn't get there. And I had this crazy hustle that I did. I don't even know how I came up with this, but you couldn't get lotion. Scratch the lotion. You had to buy lotion from there. You could get shampoo, conditioner, deodorant, razors, like good razors that didn't cut up your face. So that was my big stuff that I always got in my boxes. And there was you had to choose, you got to pick 12 things, and you would take this little piece of paper and check off the boxes. And I wanted, more than anything, like when I went on a visit, I wanted cologne because I wanted to smell good. Like I didn't want to smell good in prison, but when I went on a visit with my mom or with my grandmother or, my cousins would come to see me, I wanted to smell good. And you couldn't have cologne. That was like, I think because it had alcohol in it, was flammable or something. So I came up with this weird, I don't even know how I came up with it. But I told my mom, okay, I need you to get me a bottle of conditioner, but then I need you to dump the conditioner out. Then I need you to fill the conditioner bottle up with lotion, like an unscented lotion. And then I need you to go buy me a bottle of Dracar. Remember Dracar from the 90s and 80s?
Oh my! I think my dad used to wear that.
Oh, God, I love Dracar.
In a black bottle?
Black bottle with white letters.
Yes.
It was the best smelling stuff ever. Then dump the bottle of Dracar into the lotion inside the conditioner bottle, and then shake it up real good, put it in a box, and send it to me. And that worked for me every time. So I would have a conditioner bottle filled with Dracar scented lotion, and I didn't use it as conditioner, but when I got ready to do a visit, I would just squirt a little out, rub it on my hands, rub it on my face, and I smelled like Dracar Noir. But that became a huge hustle for me because guys learned that I had that, and I think it was like 3 or 4 packs of cigarettes for one little skeet. Like you have one squirt, now give me you pay me. And then, no, but they only used it for visits. Like when
one squirt of lotion?
Yeah, but it was, because you couldn't have cologne. There was nothing you could have. And then deodorant that smelled good, you couldn't have that either. They sold that. They gave you the white ball stuff that did nothing. And then you could buy the speed stick, like those high school ones that burn your arm. You could buy that off the store. But if you got a box in, you could order Gillette, gel, whatever, Cool Wave.
What do you mean if you got a box in?
A box in from your family.
Oh, from your family.
An incentive
okay.
box or a Christmas box. So that was what I always got in my boxes.
Okay.
I made sure I was going to keep myself in the game. But the first time I got robbed, that was what they stole. They stole all my good
Oh, they
stuff.
stole your coveted.
Yeah, so it wasn't just the hygiene. It was like that was also my hustle, especially with the cologne. And they didn't know what they were stealing. They were probably putting that in their hair, and it wasn't even conditioner. It was lotion. But that's just one of the ways like we got over
Yeah.
to figure that out. But the worst part about being that is just I guess like the instability because you never knew what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything could kick off a riot. Somebody would get mad. It would be some kind of drama, and it was just scary, like being in that. And later on, I would go to prison in Alabama, and I would see that wasn't nothing. But at the time, it was a weird place I found myself in.
So you had your little group in the grad dorm, the place you were at the previous year. Did you find people that you connected with in the same way, like Big O?
Well, no, they were all still there.
Oh, they were.
You were
Okay.
on the compound with them, like during like yard call. Anytime you could see all your friends, but it was different for me because I was out of the dorm. They did most of their stuff in the dorm. I couldn't go back in the dorm because I was banished. I was not welcome. And they made it. They made a big deal out of that. They wanted me punished because they said I took advantage, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
But they put me in the kitchen, and it was honestly to this day I don't know I've ever seen a kitchen that size. Like they had like ovens that you could fit like 3 human beings inside of.
Wow.
But they would like make bread early in the morning, put them on racks, push them in the ovens like they were 7 foot tall. Like you would open this big door, you would push the bread in, and it would like get on the spinner, and it would spin around. It had like a convection oven. But they made everything like hamburger buns, bread, biscuits, everything. They did that every day. They did it fresh from scratch, and it was a lot of dishes. I remember that. But I mean, I'd worked in kitchens all my life, so I was like, I can do this. This is not that big a deal. But it was just so hot and so sweaty and just so nasty, like washing all those dishes where they were cooking. And I just was like, well, here I am. I might as well do my best. And, I worked hard. I hated it. I was depressed. And, it was like a sobering, like reality check. But what ended up happening was I only washed dishes for like 3 days. I think it was my 3rd or 4th day in there because they don't have like chefs or anything like that. They have correctional officers that run the main kitchen, and they're human beings that are responsible for putting out 1,000 meals a day times 3.
Which is insane.
It is. It's crazy. The quality wasn't that great. Some of it was okay, but I mean that's hard work.
Yeah.
But I'd worked in kitchens all my life, so I knew how to cook. And I remember this little short fat lady that was the CEO in there. Her name was Miss Clark. And I had seen Miss Clark the last 2 years, and she was so mean. She would holler at you, scream at you, if she saw you out. Miss Clark was one of those COs that you don't mess with.
CO stands for?
Correctional officer.
Oh, okay.
So you call them COs or police or.
Okay, yeah.
So she was a correctional officer, but she ran the kitchen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But sometimes they might put her, if they needed somebody, they might call her and put her, standing in line where you go do commissary. And they had all these rules, like you had to stand at attention and you couldn't move. And if you did, they'd scream at you or kick you out of line. And there was nothing you could do about it. So I was scared of her when I went in there because she was mean. Like she was like one of those mean teachers, like, ooh, don't mess with her. Don't mess with Miss Clark.
Was she a big woman, a small woman, a black woman, a white woman?
She was short, but she was big. And honestly, I'm not trying to make fun of her because I grew to love her. She kind of looked like a man, but she was a woman. You just didn't mess with the police in there.
Right.
Like I had a dorm officer, Officer Ramos, and he was like an Italian, and he was cool, and he'd cut up and play with us. And like we would get in a banter with him, and it was all fun and games. And I remember one time I was in a canteen line, and there was a famous, well, I can maybe say infamous inmate on our campus. His name was Panero, and he messed with sissies. Like he wasn't a sissy, but he messed with sissies. Like he was addicted to like prison sex or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he was Cuban, and he had dark skin, dark hair, and green eyes. And he probably could have passed for my brother. to be honest with you. But I was in the line one time, and it was my turn to come up, and he said, "Panero, it's your turn." And it was like a banter between us. We were teasing. And so I said, "Yeah, that's why Miss Clark, that's why your wife caught you with Miss Clark." Something like that, to that effect. And I embarrassed him in front of everybody because I like one upped him on the little banter.
Right.
And they would grab their little walkie-talkies and call for backup. That means basically you're fixing to get your ass whooped. Like, they're coming to get you. And I just remember, like, begging him, like, "What are you doing? Like, why would you do that to me?" I mean, but I pissed him off because I embarrassed him. And I remember this was maybe my first or second year in prison, making up my mind, don't play with the police. You don't mess with the police. Don't be friendly. Don't do it.
James K. Jones crossing the line with a joke?
Well, no, he would joke. It was like a band, and I loved him up to that point. But after that, like, I'm like, you're dead to me. I'm
So
done
what
with
did
you.
he do? Did he hit you?
No, he got a hold of himself. He realized what he was doing, and he canceled his backup. But he let me slide on that one. But I never played with him again after that, and he knew it. Like, I don't. Like, y'all, they have the power. They have the power.
Right.
So I mean, they can make it easy for you, or they can make it really hard for you. And he was the type, if he liked you, he would bring you cigars and pizza. But if he didn't like you, he would tear up your room and make your life hell. And after that, I never really, dorm officers, they were the police, don't mess with them.
Well, coming back to Miss Clark, I can imagine being a woman too, I'm sure she felt like she needed to make sure people knew
Well, that's a hard
that
job.
she wasn't going to be messed with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just the work that they put out, like the inmates did the work, but they had to supervise it. But they had these huge, like, they were steam kettles, and they were like the size of, I can't even say, they were probably 200 gallons. Like, they were, two humans could fit inside of a steam kettle, and that's where they cooked. They cooked eggs in there. They cooked all the, whatever they were going to cook. And that, I think it was the third or fourth day. It was the first week I was in the kitchen. She was struggling, like, because, I mean, it's like with anything else, you get bad help and you can't get it done, and they have to have the meal ready to go by the time it needs to be gone. And I saw her struggling, like, trying to pick something, and I just went over and helped her. Like, I mean, but it wasn't like I'm going to try to suck up to Miss Clark. It was like, oh, she's having a bad day. Let me go help her.
It was almost instinctual. You knew, like, she needs help. And
yeah, well, I knew how kitchens work.
Right.
I'd never
right.
worked in a kitchen of that magnitude. Like, I didn't know how to feed 1,000 people, but I knew how to get stuff done. And I went over and just was helping her.
Right.
And you would have thought that I just brought her a bag of money. Like, she just changed, like, in that little 30-minute interchange. And she, like, pulled me off and was like, "Do you know how to cook?" And I was like, "Yeah." And the next day I came in and they were like, "You're working with Miss Clark. Don't worry about washing dishes no more. We'll have somebody else." And, we became fast friends after that. Like, she was one of my people.
So you were her assistant, or?
Well, I started cooking for her.
Okay.
She was in charge of dinner. The Sarge was in charge of breakfast. There was another guy, this whiny guy, that was in charge of lunch. And then she was in charge of dinner. And I started working with her for dinner. You know how I am in the kitchen and in the food service. Like, I just started learning. And
or in life in general.
Really?
Yeah.
That's sweet. Remember, we're taping this, so I can play this back. Next time you're mad at me, I'm going to say...
there are other things, too, that I'm recognizing.
Let's go back to episode 9 of the podcast to 19 minutes and 55 seconds and that good stuff you said about me. I'm just kidding. But seriously, I just started helping her. And then, for me, it gave me some kind of a purpose. Like, like, I could have something to do. And, I threw myself into that, and... It might have been 2 or 3 weeks. There were, like, so many coveted, like, jobs on the campus. But once one of those jobs was secured, like, whoever had that job, if they were good at it, they were going to have that job till they got out of prison. So it might be years before that even came open again. Mm-hmm. About 2 or 3 weeks later, there was 2, like, main jobs in the kitchen. One was, like, the admin working in the office with Sarge and all the officers. And the other, which I wasn't interested in that because that's boring, but there was a lot of influence to be had in that job. But the other one was to be the the butcher, which was, they called you a butcher, but it was just meant you kept up all the meat. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And the guy that was doing that, his name was Salisbury. He was weird. But I'd worked with him a couple times because they asked me to, and I didn't like him, he didn't like me. But he was getting ready to leave, and they were looking for somebody to take his place. And Sarge called me in and was like, I've been watching you. I've actually been watching you closer than I watch other people, and I think you're the man for this job. Do you want it? And it was a lot of responsibility, but it came with so many like privileges. Like basically, you could eat anything you want. You could have anything. I mean, you were like the controller of the things that mattered. Does that make sense? Because they had like somebody that was in charge of like the dry stock, that would control like paper boxes and like flour. But as the butcher, you were in charge of the butcher shop, all the meat, all the cheese, all the coffee, all the frozen. Like you were. That was all you.
Meat, cheese, coffee, all the things that matter. You're right.
Well, I mean, also they had to have. You have to understand, on a compound like that, you had to have one person that would answer for everything because they kept such a tight inventory, and they had to. I mean, number one, most of the stuff in Florida came from USDA, and USDA is the United States Department of Agriculture. Mm-hmm. Like, you had to account for every pound of everything. So everything had to be very controlled. They also had, like, a dietitian that would put out the menus, and so you had to strictly follow those menus. Like, there were some, like, protocols where if you had to, like, take a left or a right, you could, but they didn't. It was kind of a no-no to do that. And so he put me in charge of the butcher shop, and that was a game changer for me as far as prison life. I mean, influence with
inmates or the leader or the
both. Like, you had influence with inmates, you had influence with the officers. Like, the setup in the main kitchen was like there was a sergeant that ran everything. Then there was like a civilian food service director. I can't remember his name. Then there were like 4 or 5 officers that worked for them. And if they made you a butcher, you were kind of almost, you weren't over the correctional officers because, you're an inmate. But as far as influence, you had more influence than they did.
So you were the butcher for all those people that was eating those 1,300 meals a day?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it wasn't just that. Like, you controlled everything, and then you ran the staff canteen, which meant you had a lot of influence with COs because you fed them their meals. Mm. And, they might ask, can we have broccoli casserole? It was just...
Make special requests.
Yeah, but my hustle that came from that was I had all the meats, all the cheeses, all the breads, all the things. And so I had a slicer where I sliced all my meats on, because that was the other thing. Nobody could work with you. You had to work by yourself.
Which you loved.
I did, because I could control it. Yeah. I just remember the first time we made meatloaf. God, it took me forever to learn how to make meatloaf, because you would take the ground beef and you would put all the stuff in and you would make meatloaf like you would normally make it. But they wanted it portioned out, which meant you had to scoop it out. And then they would cook it on sheet pans. And you had to do that 1,000 times. And I remember thinking, my arm is going to fall off. But if I can't make this meatloaf, I'm going to lose this job, and I really need this job. And there was like a bandsaw that you'd have to cut chicken up on. And it was like, it would be so easy for you to cut your arm off on a bandsaw. And I remember like one time having to cut like 2,000 chickens. And you would cut each chicken in half. Then you would cut the breast from the leg quarter, and then the leg quarters went to the inmates, and the breasts went to the officers. So we didn't get a lot of breasts. I mean, I did, because I worked in the kitchen. But it was a lot of work.
It sounds like, how many hours a day did you work?
Well, you're only required to work like 8 hours a day. But once I got the butcher job, and I was in the Wild Wild West in the dorm that I didn't want to be in, all I wanted to do in my dorm after that was sleep. So I spent all my time at work. So Sarge would let me do my schedule daily. Like, I don't care when you come in, as long as you get everything done and everything's handled. And then I had, like 4 or 5 inmates that did other things that didn't work directly with me, but I was responsible to make sure they got their work done. Does that make sense?
So you only had to work 8 hours, but how many hours were you working a day?
Well, I hated where I was living because it was rough. And I kind of had a space there because there was office space that technically was not my office space, but they let me have a little corner of the office where I could keep my stuff so I don't have to worry about my stuff getting stolen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there were 3 work calls for the main kitchen where I worked. You could come in at 2:30, which was when they came in to do breakfast. You could come in at 4:30, which was just an early work call. Or you could come in at 8, which was a regular work call. So he gave me the freedom. You can come in at 2:30, you can come in at 4:30, you can come in at 8, as long as you get your work done.
You're talking about 2:30 in the morning?
Yeah, well, you had to have breakfast ready for 1,000 men by 6 o'clock.
Right.
So you had to start at the work calls at 2:30. You didn't really start work till 3 because like when they move you in the night, like it's a lot of security. It took you 30 minutes to get there.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you just went to work. You had to you had to jump through all these hoops. But the bonus for that was if you did a 2:30 work call or 4:30 work call, then you got a pass to go back to the dorm. So if I wanted to do 2:30, 4:30, go back to the dorm, I could go to sleep before anybody even came in. And then I could be up and back at work and never even see any of the other animals that I live with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was a strategy but it was working for me. I threw myself into my work. I had something to do. And that was the worst part of me for being locked up was I didn't have anything to do. Even the drug program. Like there was ways to pass your time, but there was no purpose because I was like an assistant to a counselor that didn't do counseling.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That is, I mean, to this day, I feel like you're the same person then as you are now. That's torture in itself. I mean, because you and I are similar in this way. Like, I feel like there's never nothing to do. Ever. There's always something to do.
No, there is always something to do.
There is, but I'm saying even single before I was married, I thought
too.
I was stressed and never had enough time because I will always, like, there's always something to do. And if there's not, there actually is because I'll make something. I mean,
Yeah.
you put something in front of yourself.
It was crazy. Did I talk about how we did it? Like we put it on Cambros? Have I talked about that?
Not yet. Put what on Cambros? And what are Cambros?
So-
I didn't even know what a Cambro was till I met you.
Well, a Cambro is it's basically like a thermos. So I might be telling your age here, but when I was a youngster, my granddaddy would go to work at Westinghouse every day. My grandmother put his coffee in a thermos. She put his soup, whatever he was eating that day, in a thermos. And a thermos is like a plastic, like thermal.
Oh, I know what a thermos is.
A thermal container.
Yeah.
So if you put hot stuff in it and you close it up, it'll stay hot for like 4 hours. If you put cold stuff in it, it'll stay cold for 4 hours. Kind of like a Yeti.
Yes.
But I don't know if I've ever put anything hot in a Yeti. I need to try that.
Oh, I have.
I haven't.
I put coffee, yeah.
I don't. I mean, I feel like I drink my coffee in the morning and I'm done with it. But a Cambro was like a big container. It was like a huge thermos that you put pans of food in. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So their setup there at B.C.I. there was a dining hall where all they did was serve food, make Kool-Aid or tea or whatever they made, and drop the food on the steam table and serve it.
Oh, you did talk about that. And
I
then
did.
Yes, and then the kitchen was in the
We
other
made
place.
everything. So, but we would make all the food in the main kitchen. We would put it in pans, put it in put lids on it, check the temperature, and then we would slide it into these Cambros. And these Cambros had like rollers on the bottom of them. And there was a little truck that would back up to the side of the main kitchen. Every 3 times a day, you would just slide the food on there. And then Miss Klein, who was she wasn't a correctional officer. She was a food service worker. She was mean too. Well, her husband was Sergeant Klein, and he was like the meanest Sarge on the compound. And you didn't mess with him. He would do something to you, and you definitely did not disrespect her. And I learned when I was working the kitchen, like they all lived behind us in the little community. Like
Really?
they it was like trailers and houses. Like the superintendent and all the the higher uppers had nice brick houses, and then all these COs, maybe not 100% of them, but most of them lived in these little trailers and stuff back there. So they were like a tight knit community. She was the one that you don't mess with her. Because if you even look at her, and she was young and she was cute, she thought she was pretty. I never thought, I would always challenge.
You put her in the cute category, not the pretty category.
Well, I would always challenge the status quo. She's cute because we're in prison, but I mean, she ain't all.
Because there was no one to compare her to.
She ain't all that. I mean, but she thought she was all that because she had 1,000 men looking at her every day. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
there was a lot of stroking going on there with her. But then her husband was the meanest Sarge there was, so you didn't even cut your eyes at her. You knew that. I learned that the first week. Don't cut your eyes at Miss Klein. But anyway, she became like working after I was working with her. Like she became one of my biggest fans. Like she was like, they don't even need us here. We'll just give the keys to Jones. He can handle it, you know. But she would drive. Her job was to drive the food from the main kitchen to the dining hall and get unloaded 3 times a day. That's what she did. But learning that was how I learned how to do catering. And then, you know, many years later, in 2002, when I was working for Leonardo's, we started a catering business.
Which is a restaurant you
That
were working
was
for, yeah.
that was the first long-term job I had in Birmingham. But my boss, I told him, I want to start a catering business. It's my dream. And we started Leonardo's Catering. And he took me to Bresco in downtown Birmingham and just told me, buy whatever you need.
What is Bresco?
It stands for Birmingham Restaurant Supply Company.
Oh, okay.
And actually, my stepmom works there, so I kind of understood that.
But you knew exactly what you needed to do catering because of your experience in prison. Yeah.
Yeah, so we set up Leonardo's Catering, and you know we made a lot of money off that business. But it was basically we would go to the Regents Building downtown and roll food in and set it up, lasagna, spaghetti, you know, everything. But I learned that in prison. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about that. And then when I started Kairos in 2006, you know, catering was 70% of my business.
Right.
That was how we did it.
Crazy.
People would order it. We'd cook it, put it in the Cambro, put it on the back of a truck. My catering guy would take it somewhere and deliver it. And I mean, you know, I did that for 7-8 years.
So did you get any hustles from your butcher job, from the food job?
My biggest hustle was I had a slicer, and you didn't get like they were very like resourceful as far as like how they spent their money.
Yeah.
So you would get like, we had lunch meat for lunch. You wouldn't get like we would go now and buy a pack of lunch meat where it's already sliced up. We would get like whole turkeys, whole ham, roast beef, and then I'd have to cut it. Well, I learned how to make a sub sandwich where it was, and to this day I can still taste one of these things. They were so good. I should make one for you, but I don't have a slicer.
Okay, well, quick question. Was the sub or the tuna tang better?
They were right up there together.
Okay.
I think the tuna tang was more popular with inmates. Inmates love my tuna tang, but the sub sandwiches, those were more directed at the police.
Okay.
Because I could fix a bag of my sub sandwiches and take them to laundry, and then he would give me whatever I wanted. Like, what do you need? You need some new blues? What do you need? You need new underwear? What can I do for you?
So how did you make the sub? Did it look like a Subway sandwich?
Not really. I don't even know if I'd ever been to Subway, but it was like a hoagie bun, and you had to package them up where you could get them out of there.
You mean sneak them out of there?
Well, now if I was taking them to the police, I could take them. My sergeant would let me take them to the police, so I could fill up a bag every day and take them. And I had a deal with my dorm officer, like, I'm gonna bring you a sub every day, but there's gonna be 3 in the bag. You're only gonna get 1. Do you understand? And he'd be like, that's fine. And so that was my hustle every day.
Oh, so you sold the other 2?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And people would go crazy for these, but they were so good. They were good. So it was hoagie bun, mayonnaise on one side, mustard on the other, freshly sliced roast beef or freshly sliced ham and turkey, and then freshly sliced cheese, tomatoes, onions, bell peppers, like sliced up lettuce that I did on a slicer, and then I made like this vinaigrette thing. It was just like, you know, just a basic vinaigrette, and just squirt on there, and then tight wrap it in plastic wrap, and it would, if it sat for like an hour, it was the best sandwich. It was just the best sandwich ever. But that became my calling card that last couple years I was in Florida, because everybody wanted one of those. Everybody wanted one of those sandwiches. They were so good. It really kind of like opened the door. Like, I could get anything I wanted. I could get a bed movement. I could live in whatever dorm I wanted to live in. I could get laundry. I could get anything, like anything. And then that helped me out because I was able to, you know, they sent me to the kitchen for punishment. And then 6 months later, I was like, I got the power. I can do whatever I want. Like, y'all trying to kick me down. I'm rising up.
So, but were you doing anything like in that sub hustle that you could have gotten caught for or gotten in trouble for, or was it all kind of?
Well, it was both. I still ran game. So I had like I guess a legal hustle was to the other officers, because I would always ask. But then there was some other stuff, shady stuff I was doing with the sub sandwiches, then with coffee. Like, coffee was a big thing in prison. And the only coffee you could buy at B.C.I. was Maxwell House. But in the butcher shop in the freezer, we got Taster's Choice, which you probably don't know the difference, but that's like the Cadillac of coffees. And so I was in control of the Taster's Choice, so I would sneak that out and sell it. And I made a lot of money off Taster's Choice. But I had a way of the illegal stuff that I did. I had a way of doing it that I don't think I never got caught. But I had a roommate, Mud. Actually, this being in the kitchen afforded me privileges of being able to choose where I wanted to live. And I had a buddy, Mud. He was from a little small town, Tifton, Georgia. He was, I won't say his name. He was probably the best roommate I ever had. He was just a country boy. He worked for maintenance, and he was one of those get her done kind of guys. Like, he could build anything, do like, any problems you had. Like, he'd figure out a way to make it work.
What was he in prison for?
It's funny you say that. In the county jail, you kind of ask. You say, "What'd you do? Oh, what'd they get you for?" But in prison, you don't ask. You just don't. It's kind of like we're all. It's like a code, maybe. Like, we're all in prison. We all have sentences. We all have a DC number, or in Alabama, we had an AIS number. And unless you were some kind of a notorious criminal, you just you didn't ask, you didn't tell. I mean, you didn't. It wasn't even. And when people would ask me what I was in prison for, and I would tell them, they didn't believe me. They thought I was lying about the shootout with the cop and robbing and all that stuff. They didn't. You making that up?
So you're saying you live with this guy Mud or in a cell or whatever, and you never asked him why he was there?
No, you didn't.
That's crazy to me.
No, you just didn't. Well, part of it was it didn't matter. And you would get close to somebody and you might hear part of their story. But for the most part, you really didn't. I remember I had one of my last roommates I had in Florida. I won't say his name. He was a kind of weird character. But I mean, he was clean and, he wasn't a bad roommate. But I remember the day that he got out of prison, he went into this deep depression for like 3 weeks before he got out. And I was like, what kind of weirdo are you? You're going home. Like, I would give my leg to get out of here and go home. But our dorm officer, Officer Burke, I remember him coming to me the day after he left and telling me, you know what he was in prison for? Because they can't tell you while they're there. Like, they'll get fired. But they can tell you after they leave.
Okay.
And he said he was in prison for rape. And I said, he was not. He broke into something or something. No, he was in prison for rape. It was a famous rape case in the town where I come from. Like, some girl at a party, he, came on to her, and she, basically told him he didn't have a chance with her, and he followed her home and raped her, and that's why he was in prison. And I didn't believe him, because I knew this guy. And then it was 2 months later, there was a news article. This guy, who had been my roommate, that slept over me for, at least 7-8 months, got out of prison and raped somebody else. And then he got life in prison after that. But I was just like, wow, that's a lot. But you didn't ask. You just didn't ask.
It's just crazy to me. I mean, just never having that experience, just that's something that you've done that has led you to this whole new life in prison, basically. And that's something that you never talk about.
Well, once you're there, it doesn't matter. You got a sentence. You got to complete your sentence. Now, there is one thing that you do talk about. It's if anybody's in there for any kind of a sex crime, like molesting or anything like that. But 90% of the time, they never make it out to the general population. They stay in a different place. And that was probably, when we get to Alabama, we'll talk about that. There was a lot more, I saw a lot more stuff about that. But again, at B.C.I., this was a youthful offender prison. So people that had these extreme cases, they would have went to Florida State Prison or one of the max camps. And this was a medium security. It wasn't juvenile, but it kind of was.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But Mud was my roommate, and he was a problem solver. And I'm trying to remember, he came from he was a single mother. He was the only child. And when he came to prison, his family just basically were like, good luck. Don't write us. He never got letters, never got money. So he had to figure out a way to make it himself. He was always hungry. Bless his heart. I mean, he worked for maintenance, and he worked all the time. He was his nickname wasn't Mud for no reason. Like, he could fix anything. But he gave me a back brace that he got from medical, and it was like this white mesh thing with Velcro that you could put around your midsection. It was supposed to keep your back straight. But I didn't need it for the back problems. I needed it to stuff sandwiches and roast beef and ham and coffee and stuff. I would stuff it down in there, and I could get patted down by an officer, and they couldn't feel it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I mean, it was nothing on a compound of that size. Like, if I were to leave the main kitchen with a bag, I could say, this is for Officer Burke, this is for my dorm officer, and they wouldn't mess with me. But you might get stopped and get patted down 4 times before you got to your dorm, which was, 4 blocks from where you worked. And so that was pretty common. But because of my back brace, I would just stuff things in my back brace. I never got patted down. I never got caught. Now, Sarge, the Merkelinger that I worked for, he caught me stealing coffee one time, and he knew that I was stealing coffee. I knew that he knew that I was stealing coffee, but he was like, that's just his thing that he does. I'm not even going to say anything about it, so he kind of let that slide, but it still bothered me a little bit.
It's probably the fact that it's hard to find someone who can do that job and do it well, and if it's something minor that's not affecting him, I don't know.
Yeah, it was just
not
coffee.
Take the time, yeah.
I mean, that's part of survival in there.
Yeah.
You get your hustle, you learn. But I did. I threw myself into my work. The dorm didn't really matter to me after that. Then I got in the room. Mud became my roommate. I think I moved to F dorm. He was a good roommate. And then he had like a buddy, Farrell. I think Farrell was from Georgia. He was like a real simple, kind of redneckish kind of guy. And I love Farrell. But I used to get on his nerves because me and Valenza, we would sit together and like plot out, we're going to start a food business when we get out.
Oh, this is a guy from way back. Your previous roommate.
Yeah, but he was still on the compound.
Okay.
Like, I didn't live with him anymore, but I could still see him every day.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it'd be kind of like, if somebody's your roommate and you live in Birmingham, just because you're not roommates anymore, you still see him in Birmingham.
Well, it's like being in college, I guess. You're still going to see him around in classes, yeah.
But we were serious about, we're going to start a food business when we get out of prison. Like, I was moving to Miami because he already had the space, the equipment, everything. His family was in, I was in it to win it. But I remember Farrell telling me one time, I'm tired of hearing y'all talk about this restaurant nonsense all the time. So I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, y'all are just doing PPDs. And so I said, what are PPDs? And he said, prison pipe dreams. You know good and well, you ain't going to get out of prison and do nothing but try to make it. And you'll be lucky if you make it because you're going to be on probation. And you ain't going to start a restaurant. You ain't going to do none of the stuff you're talking about you're going to do. And I remember when I started Kairos in 2006, I remember thinking, I wonder where Pharaoh is now. Like, I want him to know, like, that was not a PPD. It was not a PP. It was not a prison pipe dream. Like, I achieved what I set out to do. But he was a good guy, and I remember him. I believe the year was 1995 or 96. No, it was 95. It was like towards the end of the year. It was during the OJ trial. Do you remember that?
I do remember the OJ trial. Who doesn't remember the OJ trial?
Well, I was sick of the OJ trial. Like, every time I turned on the TV, it was OJ. If you got a newspaper, it was OJ. Magazine, OJ. Everything OJ, trial. And I was over it. And then I would call home, and my mom would be telling me about the OJ trial, and she watched all of it. And I'm like, don't you have anything to do?
People were fascinated by it, and it was fascinating.
Well, it had a different feel for us because somehow that got turned into a racial thing. And I remember we were scared of what was going to happen when they found him guilty. And from the way I saw it, like, how could they not find him guilty? I mean, duh. And I remember the day before, like, when they sent when everybody rested their case and they sent it out for the jury or whatever, I remember me and Farrell were walking back to F dorm, and there was a little group of guys that just looked over at us, and the ones that started trouble like that would run in packs of like 7, 8, 9, 10. So it was never 1 or 2. It was always 10, 12. And one of them just looking back at us and hollering at us, if they find him guilty, we're going to mess y'all's crack of shit up.
Oh, wow.
And no, but that was going to happen. There was going to be a riot. If they found him guilty, there would be a riot at B.C.I. And I remember Farrell just looked at them, just stony-eyed. It was like, why don't you pretend like they found him guilty then? And it was just me and him, and I was like, shit, are you crazy? Like, I'm trying to go home. I ain't trying to get in a ride over
You're like, I'm
OJ.
trying to stay the butcher. That's
I
what I'm
don't,
trying to do.
I don't even think OJ knows he's black. I mean, all the stuff that's happening. But then they found him not guilty, and then they celebrated. They had a party after that. But
Thank God for you guys.
no, that was a scary time. And I lived through 3 or 4 riots when I was there. And riots are nothing nice because then the police turn on everybody. And, you're going to sit on your bunk and you're not going to move for days, even to pee or take a bath. I remember one riot I lived through, I was 6 days without a shower. And if you can imagine that in a dorm full of men, just the stink. It was all, but that was how they had to control it. They had to do what they had to do to keep chaos down.
Well, what happened during a riot? I mean, prison, what? I mean, what does that look like?
A prison riot?
Yeah.
You'd have a group that would go crazy and start fighting, and they would, I never did because I never wanted to stay there. Like, a lot of people had knives and shanks and all this other stuff, like if something went down so they could protect themselves. And then if a riot went down, they'd go find I saw a sword during one riot. I was like,
oh my gosh.
but there's ways to make stuff. And then, we had like a metal fab shop.
A sword?
A guy had a sword. It was a prison sword. It wasn't like it wasn't from Japan.
What is a prison sword?
It's like a piece of metal that's been sanded down where if you get in a conflict, you can take that and push it through somebody and kill them.
Wow.
So I stayed away from all that. And then actually my job that I was doing in the kitchen, it helped me stay away from all that because all I did was work. I went to work, I worked long hours, and then I didn't really like the 2:30 wake up because that was a little much for me, but I would do the 4:30 wake up, go in, and then get to go back in the dorm early, and I would, take a shower, spend 2 or 3 hours. I'd be the only person in the dorm by myself, and then I'd just go to sleep early and get up at 4:30 the next day and start over again.
So you spent a lot of time by yourself.
Yes, I needed it. That was my survival, but it was like I had something to throw myself into, and the biggest thing of working the kitchen was I knew how bad the food was because I'd been there for 2 years, and I made it better. I remember that first year, it was Thanksgiving in 1995. I was determined we're going to have a real Thanksgiving dinner, and like Sergeant Merklinger, he gave me permission. Do whatever you want. Tell me what you need me to order. And like after we cooked the turkeys, we took the bones, we made a stock, we made gravy. I just can't explain what happened after that. Like, because most of the inmates knew that I made it happen for them.
Was that the first time they had ever had, or, that you know of, a Thanksgiving dinner?
We always had Thanksgiving dinner, but it was gross. It was just like, it was not delicious goodness.
You just made it good.
No, we made it good. It wasn't just me. It was like our whole team, but I was leading the team.
Right.
Like, I had a couple officers that would get aggravated with me over stuff like that, but we made it happen, and that, I don't know, that was my first, like, I could do something that could influence thousands of people, and that wasn't even like a power thing. That was just like it was very humbling. Like, I can make sure you have a delicious meal for Thanksgiving, and it was good. But I kept myself busy the whole time. I had a lot of hustles going on. I had someone that I looked up to, a guy that was in prison. His name was Edge. He was what we called a long timer. When I got to Alabama, I would see people that had like long sentences, but the average sentence at B.C.I. was like 3 years.
Okay.
But this guy, when I got to B.C.I. in 1994, he had already been there for like 5 years. So he had, I can't remember what his charge was, but it was something that got him in a lot of trouble. And so he had like a long sentence, but because he got sentenced when he was like 17, he had to be there for a long time. So Edge was like an inmate emperor. I can't explain it. He had all the power. He knew the police. He'd been there forever. If he told them something, they believed him. He could make stuff happen, but he was also a hustler. He was a huge hustler. And in a sense, he kind of became like a business partner for me. Not really. I don't even know if he would say that, but he like opened some doors for me to be able to gain some influence with my food hustle. And he worked in the officer canteen. So he was around them all the time. He had a lot of influence with them. And I was in charge of sending the food to the officer quarters every day. So he would ask me for this, and this, and I would put it in a pan, put the lid on it, put it in the Cambro, and it would go up there. And I had an understanding with the guy that rolled it up there. Like, you don't look inside this pan, you just give it the edge.
How did you get that understanding or whatever? I mean, you just look at him a certain way or...
Well, I mean, part of that was you'd give somebody a cut or something, or like with Edge, people were scared of him because he'd get people in trouble if he wanted to. And you didn't want to go up against him.
Right.
And I would say his name because his nickname was Edge. I'd say his name, but he's like a media person now. He has a radio show and a family, and so I don't want to say his name.
Wow.
But he was going to be there for some time, and he got in there young, but he was really smart. So he figured out like how to hustle, but his hustle was different from my hustle. My hustle was I want to be comfortable and do things that I want now. His hustle was I want to set myself up when I get out of here to make it. So he probably made hundreds of thousands of dollars during the time he was at B.C.I. off these little low-level hustles that he did.
So, I mean, what was one of his hustles that you think he made the most money at?
Probably coffee. But, I mean, he was into everything. He ran B.C.I., like the underbelly of B.C.I.
Yeah.
Like, he was the guy that had the influence. There was a thing where, like, if they ordered a cup of coffee, because everything was measured there. Everything was strict. And, like, if an officer ordered a cup of coffee, that was like a quarter they had to pay. So he would scoop their coffee out, and then he had this little side thing where he would scoop another scoop somewhere else. And so he was actually cheating them, but then he would, like, put it in these little baggies and then bring it back on the compound and sell it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then, like, the Cubans were crazy about coffee. Like, they wanted, like, real coffee. Like, they didn't want the other stuff.
My experience with Cubans is they are very serious about their coffee.
Yeah, well, your Uncle Julio, I mean, they gave us
Right.
that for our wedding present. They gave us a Cuban coffee maker.
Right.
And I remember him, Uncle Julio, the first time I met him, like, making me Cuban coffee. And was like, it's so strong. It's so strong. I was like, you obviously haven't been in prison in Florida because this is not this is not that strong. But they had a recipe for it, and it was just that, and then cigars. Our cigars, Black and Mild, any kind of cigars got banned from our compound because they had a riot over them. But they still sold cigars on the officer canteen where Edge worked. So what had been something that had a value of $1.50 for 5 Black and Milds back in the day, I think it was $1.52. It wasn't much. Overnight, because they banned them from the compound, a pack of Black and Milds was worth $25. Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah.
So then he would, like, smuggle back the Black and Milds, and he made a lot of money. He did a lot of, but for me, like, he taught me how to do prison business because he taught me how everything can be a hustle if you want it to be.
So this is a question just because I don't know. I mean, you said he maybe made even hundreds of thousands of dollars while he was in there. Is there a bank account, or where does he put that money?
No, it's like low-level stuff like I was doing. I would say, I'll give you this coffee, this sub sandwich. You give me 2 packs of cigarettes and a bag of coffee. $10.
Like bartering, basically.
Yeah. But stuff he was doing, he would have people, like, he would let, like, an account build up, and then your people would send his people money, and then they'd put it up for him. Does that make sense?
An account built up, like you guys. Oh, you had an account where your parents or
Sent
your
money.
Yeah.
No.
Money.
I don't even think he dealt in that. Like, his was more like you will be my client, and I will build you up until you owe me $500, and then your people need to send my people $500, and then they would keep it. It would never even get inside the prison.
Oh wow. Okay.
Well, that was very common. I never got that, like, high level with that stuff. I mean, there was once or twice where I did some stuff with, like, there were inmates that couldn't, they would get approved for a Christmas box, and then they didn't have anybody to fill it for them. And so they would say, if you'll get me a pair of tennis shoes, you can have my box. And then I would have somebody that I knew, my family or somebody, and they would fill the box for me. So then I would get all the extra stuff, but then there would be an extra pair of shoes for him. So it was like a win-win. It's a game, but he was different because he was more, he had like a business mind. Like he could,
right.
And there was corruption in it, but it was like that was the world that we were in. You know, trying to navigate through that, figure out how how to do that. But I learned a lot from him.
And
then
he's a radio personality today. Is that what you said?
yeah, when we get off here, I'll show you his. We've connected. I actually told him when we first connected on social media like 10 years ago, I was like, I was writing a book and you're in it. And he was like, don't use my whole name. But he was literally, when I left B.C.I, he was the last person I talked to. Because he was the guy that worked with the police. Like, he was always up front with the, like the ward, not the warden. They didn't call them wardens in Florida. They called them superintendents. And, all the captains and the lieutenants and colonels and all the, the uppers.
Mm-hmm.
And he was good. But there were so many people that I met that I feel like influenced my life, that on this side, looking back 24 years, that have just done so much with their life. Like,
right.
I mean, it is sad. Like, sometimes I'll remember names, or be going through a journal and then say, I wonder what happened to so-and-so. And then you can go on a website and type in names and see what happened. And it's probably like 75% of people are back in prison, or have just been in prison and never got out, or got out for 5 minutes and went back. But there were a few that stood out. He was one of them. He was determined. He was not going to be, this was not going to be his life. And he inspired me to want to do something different. But it was like, at the same time, I couldn't figure out what the different thing was, because I was just trying to, navigate through that life. But then, there were people, I mentioned in one of the podcasts, like, I was close to a lot of people in the, Hispanic community. I can think of guys that I've lost touch with, Quintana, who was a Cuban, Tejada, who was a Dominican. These people, if you were not an American citizen and you got charged with a felony, you went to prison, you did your time, and then when your time was up, when you paid your debt to society, you didn't get released. You got sent to an INS prison, so like an immigration prison.
Okay.
And people could get lost in those forever. And I could probably name you 10 people that I would love to know what happened to them, but I'll never know. Like, they're not on the map. I mean...
And it's because they weren't U.S. citizens?
Yeah. If you are not a U.S. citizen and you commit a crime and you get found guilty and you go to prison, you're going to do your time, you're going to pay your debt, but when it's time for you to get out, you don't get out. You go to INS prison, and it's... that was painful for me, because I can think of, 5 or 6 guys off the top of my... just without even thinking hard, that I was close to at B.C.I, and just knowing, because they would snatch them up. Like, they would be like within 6 months, 5 months, 3 months of their sentence being ended, and they would just snatch them up and send them to INS, and then you never heard from them again. They're gone.
And that's because they didn't want them back in the U.S.?
It's the law. I mean, it's the law. Like, so, okay.
Is that still the law now? Do you know?
Oh, yeah. Like, okay. You don't come over here and live here and take advantage of all the things that America offers and then commit crime and then expect to get out and stay here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only exception was Puerto Ricans, because Puerto Rico is a territory and it's not a state. Puerto Rico is a territory. Puerto Ricans are American citizens, so they didn't get that treatment. And then there was a lot of Cubans that were born in America, and they were a different class because they got to get out.
Right.
But, I mean, you're talking about communist Cuba. This was when Castro was alive still. Like, this Quintana guy, I was close to him. I loved him. I still don't know. I can't find him. I've looked for him everywhere. Like, I don't know where he is. I mean, they sent him back to wherever they came from. And he was not born in America, but he grew up in Miami. He spoke perfect, like, you wouldn't even know he was Cuban.
Right.
He had, like, light skin, like... sandy blonde hair and like blue eyes, so you wouldn't even know he was not from here. But then there was this one guy, Usher, I won't say his full name. He was Canadian, but it was kind of weird. Like, his story was weird because he was born in Canada, his parents were Canadian, but they moved to somewhere in Florida when he was a baby. So he grew up American, Floridian. Like, there was nothing Canadian about this dude.
Right.
And he and I, we were like frenemies. Like, I loved him, I was close to him, but at the same time I couldn't stand him because we were always in competition with each other. And he was one of those pretty boys that was always working out and trying to, be all the stuff that I didn't care anything about.
You were too busy making subs.
I was, that's my thing. But he, because he was Canadian, he got sent to an INS prison, and they sent him back to Canada at the age of like 22.
And he had never been to Canada.
He'd never been to Canada.
Wow.
And he didn't. I don't think he had any family. It was like he just had to go back.
And he couldn't come back to America.
No, you can't. I mean, you can like steal because we don't have like the strict borders with Canada. He could have stole his way back in, but he was just like he got caught. And his crime was, I can't remember what he did, but it was like he wasn't even like he got caught up in something with a family member. It wasn't even like something he did. It was something he got like tangled up in, and then he was not a criminal. But I mean, he did like 6 years. And then I found him about 5 or 6 years ago. He's living in Canada. He's got married, has a family, started his own business. Interestingly enough, every summer they travel to Cuba for vacation, him and his wife, because the Canadians can go to Cuba. We can't because of whatever the government here tells us. And he's doing great. I mean...
Is he allowed to come to America? Like even visit?
I don't know. I don't know how that works. He would definitely be at risk. I mean, if I was afraid they were going to lock me up, I wouldn't come to America.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I love America. Just how did we get on that? I don't even know how we got on that subject.
Well, you were talking about the people you met and they disappear when they're not Americans.
And one of my last set roommates, Tejada, he was from Dominican Republic. He was like a brother to me. I didn't know him for that long, but we were roommates for like a year. And he was so like simple and pure, and just hearing his story. He was from New Jersey, and he got caught up in a drug game with some of his older, I think it was cousins. And they told him, you can make $10,000 if you go to Colombia and swallow these balloons and then come back through, and then you have the drugs inside of your body. And he went to Colombia, swallowed the things. I mean, he did wrong, don't get me wrong. But when he was coming through the airport, they stopped him, and they took him in a room and like made him take a bunch of laxatives.
Oh my gosh.
Until they proved that he was full of the drugs or whatever. And he got like a 15-year sentence. And then they were sending him back to Dominican Republic, which he had never been there. He grew up in New Jersey. That haunts me. Like, I wonder what happened to him. Like, he was a good guy. Like, but you can't find him. And then there's part of me that wants to think, well, maybe they just changed their name and just created a new identity, and they're living well in L.A. or somewhere. But, I've lost touch with a lot of those guys.
That's what you hope for. So it sounds like you have really made, if you can even say this, a good life for yourself.
Yeah, but but prison life don't last.
Right.
Like, you can have it good, and then it's all going to change. Around the end of 1995, that's about where we're at now, I started, like, I don't want to say sobering up because I wasn't using drugs. Well, sometimes I was. Like, I was smoking weed and doing stuff. There was, like, a sobering reality for me around the end of 1995, and it was watching guys come back that got out. I would have given anything at that point to have the opportunity to get out and prove that I could do something without being a criminal. And there were guys that would get out, and then I would be excited for them, but a little depressed because you get close to people and then they leave you. And then you look up 10 minutes later, not 10 minutes, but, like 10 weeks later, they're coming back in. And I'm like, was it the food? I mean, what was it? What is it about this life that you feel like you need to come back to? And it started like nagging at me was that this could be something that even if they let me go, this could be the rest of my life. And I didn't want that. I mean, I didn't want to be a convict. I didn't want to be a prisoner. I didn't want to, even though I'd learned how to navigate through and make this a doable for me, I didn't want that. And I started, it's like, almost like jerked me into reality. Like, you're getting a little too comfortable in here and you need to figure out what you need to do different. And it was about that time I was doing a lot of stuff with Edge, and he went through the drug dorm and lived in the graduate dorm when he came and was like, hey, my roommate's leaving. You want to move in the room with me in D dorm? And so I said, they kicked me out. And he was like, oh, no, that's been like a year ago. You can, there's ways to get around that. So I was like, I never thought I could live in D dorm again. He was like, no, you just need to go to NA or A, do some of that recovery bullshit, and then they'll let you back in the dorm. And at that time, we had a different like administration, so it was. I started that process, and I think it was November of 1995. I moved back in the drug dorm. I didn't get in the room with Ed. Something happened where that didn't work out. But I went back to D dorm, and it was like, as far as prison goes, it was like, coming home. Like I could be at peace, like with where I lived again. And I just felt like I wanted to do something different. Like I didn't want to just be a consumer of the good things. I wanted to help people. And I was selfish as I could be, but there was something in me that wanted to do something different. I remember that year we did a Christmas party for our whole dorm where we did tuna tang, we pooled everybody's resources. And, again, 70% of the people that are in prison, they don't have anything. They don't have people that care about them. They don't have anybody to send them a box on Christmas or any. And we did like a meal for everybody. And I just remember that being like the capstone of my prison experience. Like
that 1995 Christmas?
Yeah, we made a difference. Like we did something. We even had the police come in there eating tuna tang with us. I mean, it wasn't tuna. I think I had smuggled in roast beef from the kitchen, so it was roast beef tang.
Oh, well, see, that sounds like something I could get into.
But it was a definite, like something was changing in me, but I didn't know what it was. And I wouldn't say that I was there yet. Like I still had my little underhanded things I did, but I was, I guess, starting to have empathy for other people. And I could feel like the pain of people in prison in a way that I didn't really care about before. Because for me, like I had my mom, my granny, my grandmother, and my meemaw, everybody, people like took care of me while I was there. And everybody didn't have that experience. And I just remember that year, like, let's do something different. And we did, and it was a huge deal. But as I was approaching like the end of 1995, I knew that my sentence in Florida would EOS in July of 1996, and I knew I had 6 months left there. And I knew I needed to do something different. And they told me if I wanted to live in D-Dorm, I had to do some kind of recovery nonsense. And, I went through that 9-month program. I never did any of that. So I signed up to go to an NA class, which was once a week. And that was how I got back in the drug dorm. And through that process, I started journaling, which I'd never done that before. And that kind of began to set the stage for something to change in me. And I didn't know what, but I knew it was something. And I was ready for whatever was next. And I guess that needs to be the end of this podcast. But, I got to a place where I realized if I was as smart as I thought I was, how was I locked up in prison? I could run all the game and create all the prison commerce, and that stuff don't matter. Like you're not doing anything with your life. I mean, but something was changing on the inside of me, and I didn't know. I mean, even my mama would say, "Wow, like maybe this wasn't such a bad deal. You go into prison, like for the first time in your life, you have some patience. You've never had that, even as a little kid. You've never had patience." I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
What are you talking about? Full with a patient tone, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, we couldn't do anything without going through a process.
Right.
Like if you wanted to go to the commissary and get yourself some Doritos with some salsa and some ice cream, you had to sit in line for an hour and a half before you ever got there. So, I mean, all these things created like a process, and it did make me more patient, and the hopelessness left me. Like I felt like there's hope for my future. Like I can put this behind me and I can do something different, and I can have hope. So the next podcast, we'll be talking about me leaving B.C.I, leaving the Sunshine State and all the things I got myself into in the state of Florida. But it really was like a foundation for what was next, which I would have never thought what happened next would happen, but it did. So any final thoughts before we shut this one down?
Nope.
But you already know what's going to happen, so you don't even care. Thank you, guys. This is, there's a lot of healing in this for me. And just thinking about, I'm actually, as we're going back through this, I'm not even so much thinking about my experience. I'm thinking about the guys that made it. And it is so rare, the people that make it, because like nationally in the U.S., the recidivism rate is 76%.
So when you say make it, you mean come out and stay out of prison.
Recidivism means you go back. So
Right.
remember when I was working with the Foundry and we did we're trying to help them create a process. So if you line up 10 guys that are getting out of prison today and you stand them up, at least 7 of them are going to go back to prison within a year. And it's an endless cycle and it never stops. And it's just, sometimes it's for like crime and real stuff. Sometimes it's for nonsense and stupid stuff. But it's crazy that, I'm a patriot, I'm American, I love America. We are the land of the free, the home of the brave, but we imprison more of our population than anywhere in the world. Like we win at locking people up.
There's irony there, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to next time.
So the next one we'll be talking about leaving B.C.I., leaving the Sunshine State. Where were you at in 1995?
1995.
That would have made you 15.
Yes.
You were getting ready to take Hobie's car and drive it?
I was still in my Christian school in Pensacola. Not much was happening for me compared to you.
I actually wasn't that far away from you.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to the Straight Outta Prison podcast. For more, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Look up Straight Outta Prison podcast.
Yes, we have pictures and people of things that we talk about during each episode. I have really loved being able to connect people and their faces and names and some other things that we've talked about on this platform. So, Straight Outta Prison podcast, Facebook and Instagram. And if you'd like to support our show, check out our website, teamjones.co.com/podcast. Thanks, guys.
See you soon.